Asseoir, la commissaire Georgieva.
Could you please all return to your seats? The Commissioner's now arrived, so we're going to start our panel discussion.
Voilà, mesdames et messieurs, nous allons commencer les débats.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to start now on the last session before lunchtime, and we're going to try and stick to our timetable. It is a great honor to have the European Commissioner here, Mrs. Georgieva. You are in charge of crisis management, so you'll be able to talk about the usefulness of these spatial instruments for your work. And we have Galileo, GMES, and I'm sure that you support the European space policy and making use of all instruments available, including the financial instruments. So I give you the floor, Madam.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Let me first thank the European Parliament's Sky and Space Intergroup and Business Bridge Europe, as well as all others that have contributed to organizing this very relevant, for my work, very timely conference. The evolution in the space world is rapid. For those of us that are not experts, complicated, but both experts and not experts alike enjoy the tremendous benefits of the services and products emerging from this industry. And this definitely applies for the users in the area of my responsibility, humanitarian aid and crisis response. Let me digress for a minute. On October 21st this year, we had the pleasure of seeing the successful launch of the first Galileo satellites. It is a major event for the European space industry. I personally followed it very closely. For one kind of sentimental reason, the two satellites were named after two kids, a Bulgarian girl, Natalia, 9-year-old, and also a boy here from Belgium, Tis. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because what it tells us is how important it is to appeal to the European citizens for the benefits, the values of this industry, especially in these difficult times. And in my short comments, I will refer exactly to that, how space applications bring value to the European citizens and the citizens of the world in my area of responsibility. EU crisis management relies on a number of building blocks. They create a comprehensive, holistic and up-to-date machinery to deal with all types of crises. I represent only a part, one of these building blocks, the civil protection capabilities of Europe and the humanitarian capacity of the European Commission. We work very closely with High Representative Vice President Cathy Ashton. Mr. Vilmont is here from the External Action Service, in crisis in third countries, and we also work with them in coordination with the military if and when military capabilities are to be deployed. We work very closely with Commissioner Malmström in Home Affairs for events such as terrorist or cyber attacks inside the EU, with Commissioner Piebalgs on development in linking relief to rehabilitation and development, but also with others, Commissioner Potočnik and Connie Hedegaard on environmental hazards and climate risks, very critical today, but even more critical in the future in crisis management. As part of this EU crisis management chain, I represent a very large user community of space-related tools in disaster response. Workers in humanitarian aid all over the world, first and second line responders in Europe and civil protection workers sent to missions in disaster-stricken places around the world, they are either current or potential future users of space-related communication, navigation and mapping technologies and products. And let me illustrate this with some specificity. First, satellite communication. They are absolutely essential in crisis areas and crisis times, especially when ground infrastructures are damaged or destroyed. This is why we work with partners such as Telecom Without Borders to re-establish links after disasters. We still need to further develop the systematic inclusion of contributions of portacabins and communication kits to be readily available for rapid deployment. And in this respect, I don't know whether anybody from the audience is from Luxembourg. I very recently visited a fantastic project, Emergency LU in Luxembourg, that does exactly this. It provides portable, highly reliable communication set that can be taken to every part of the world within 24 hours. We also need to make sure that those that are engaging emergency response are able to communicate with each other. This implies sufficient radio spectrum during emergencies, and I understand this is a big challenge to have the communication frequencies and bandwidths, including satellite ones. Not an easy issue, but it has to be worked out. But let me tell you, allocation is not enough. And I look at those of you who come from the business community. We also need to make strides towards standardization of equipment so different teams can actually talk to each other. When I was in Haiti after the earthquake, we had our European teams extremely well equipped with portable communication devices, with one little problem that their different sets did not talk to each other. And these are the kinds of problems that we have to resolve. Our teams, our civil protection teams, our humanitarian teams, they are all equipped with the latest satellite communication, 3D and satellite phones and terminals, as well as navigation tools. And that takes me to the point of navigation tools, like the GPS or the new tools developed to use the future Galileo system, essential to manage and track our staff in the emergency zones, especially in hostile environment. And I'll tell you, very recently I was in Somalia, and I was a very direct user of this kind of equipment, and of course it gave me a peace of mind. 3, mapping. The growing number of high and very high resolution Earth observation satellite sensors means we have better capabilities today for monitoring disaster hotspots and for assessing the extent and severity of disaster-related damage than ever before. Over the last years, satellite image-based maps from either the GMES Pre-Operational Emergency Response Service, SAFER, or from UNOSAT, are used in the majority of cases in our present emergency response center, the Monitoring and Information Center. We have been activated for emergency response just over the last 4 years, 83 times. 2/3 of these activations have been in developing countries, and that the availability of satellite image has been absolutely crucial for the effectiveness of our work. In what we do, we integrate space-related tools in the whole disaster cycle, from prevention and preparedness to the immediate response, to recovery and rehabilitation. And I just want to give you a feel of what actually this means. Let me start with preparedness and prevention. Crucial to build resilience to handle disasters both inside Europe and in third countries. And what it means is supporting availability of disaster impact data, risk assessments, public awareness raising, mainstreaming into land use planning, ability to use in humanitarian efforts the most vulnerable, most affected people, knowing where they are. And in this case, satellite images that are taken at intervals, they give us the reference maps that incredibly facilitate our work. What you see on the screen, I hope everybody can see it, an example from last year's floods in Pakistan. What the map tells us is a story of a naturally created mud dam in the Hunza Valley that could collapse. The dam is just at the tip of this then red spot. Thanks to satellite imagery, we could project the full impact of such a collapse. And that map was incredibly instrumental to get the Pakistani authorities to focus on the problem and resolve it. And I can tell you this year's floods would have been devastating should this action not been taken last year. Second, our work in the response phase is largely about speed. Speed translates into lives saved and damage reduced. The more service providers understand this criticality of speed and help us with near real-time information that we can share, that is publicly available, the better chances we have of saving lives when hours and days count. And I'll give you another example. This is Poland, the floods last year, 2010. Good satellite images helped us to understand the Whistler River flood dynamics, and of course it helped us tremendously to be of use to the affected Polish population. And that kind of examples are so numerous. I mean, let's look at Haiti 2010. This is a map that we use there in our response. The industrial mud spill in Hungary last year, or the earthquake and tsunami in Japan this March. So finally, in reconstruction efforts, of course, satellite data is critical. But usually people think of satellite data for the sake of infrastructure reconstruction. And I decided to give you a map that is a different map. It is a map that we use to help the World Health Organization in Côte d'Ivoire after the conflict, after the fighting, so they can identify how best after the civil unrest they can have health plans and help the affected population. So let me finish with 3 thoughts on the way forward. Obviously, no need to dwell anymore how critical space communications are for my work. But what can we do more and better? The first one is to build bridges between the scientific community and the user community. We as users need simple, easy to understand, easy to use tools that are at the same time highly reliable. And for us, simplicity is not a luxury. It is a necessity when we strive to shorten response time to save more lives. Second, we are very concerned in our work about something that sometimes sounds like a bit like science fiction, and these are potentially low probability but high impact disasters. For example, earthquake combined with a tsunami in the Mediterranean, or space weather event, solar storm, potential to destroy critical infrastructure in space and on Earth. These low probability, high impact events require simulation and analysis so we can be prepared for that. The only tools the best tools we have are the tools that this industry can provide. And third, we need reliable backup arrangements. And I'll give you an anecdote. Last year, earthquake in Chile. All communications destroyed. The only thing that worked was the amateur radio. Okay, can satellite communications be a reliable alternative to amateur radio, given how very few amateur radio people there are to do this work? What we can do for reliability of backup. And finally, a bit of a promotion to the industry. We are going to upgrade our center, emergency response center, to be a 24-hour, 365 days of the year operation. We want to make it as effective as possible, and looking forward to capacities to come, not only the capacities we have. So I call on you to help us, to give us input so we do the best job we can for our citizens at the lowest possible cost. I'm sure the discussion today would be very informative for you, but also for us, and I very much look forward to it. Thank you.
Merci, Madame la Commissaire. Si vous permettez.
Thank you, Commissioner. We will hear from Mr. Vimont first, and then from Claude France Arnaud. Now, Mr. Pierre Vimont, you're the Secretary General of the European External Action Service, and you're the right hand to Lady Ashton. Now, what do you have to say about the space industry and the prevention and management of crisis that can benefit from it?
I'm quite honored to be here in this impressive conference to talk about space policy, which is not something we talk about too often, so I think it is really a great opportunity. I'll be very short because I understand that we're not allowed to speak too long, and I would like to make my comments very, very brief. I think, first of all, the Commissioner has said everything already, so I wonder what I could add to that. Let me just explain you where the EES may come into this debate. First of all, as you all know, the High Representative, Lady Ashton, and the EES that works with her are part of this new approach that was decided by the Lisbon Treaty, an approach that is looking at foreign policy and security matters in a more comprehensive way. Therefore, when we deal with crisis management, we have to look at all the different instruments we can play there and use all the tools that are at our disposal. And of course, satellites are a technology that is very important for us. I'll come back to that in a few seconds. But that explains why, among other things, the EES has at its disposal the European Union Satellite Center. We are in charge of the direction of this center in Torrejon, and that tells you, I think, a lot about how important, right from the beginning, we understood how important this instrument was for the efficiency of the action we take. Of course, second center of interest is that the EES, as a negotiator and as working inside many different international negotiations or international dialogue, has quite often to deal with the space issue. With many of our bilateral partners, United States among them, the whole issue of space comes back time and again in our political dialogue. But just think also about the kind of initiatives we may be able to take. It is the European Union who has launched an initiative about setting up a code of conduct for outer space activities, and many of our international partners are quite interested in that. So space is definitely one of the issues that we have to deal with on a regular basis. But the third point I wanted to make, and this is the one I mentioned while I started, is that, of course, space and space technology is absolutely essential for us in the way we deal with the crises as they come in. It's not only what Commissioner Georgieva told you a few minutes ago about the kind of natural disasters we may be facing, but it has to do, for us, mostly with the political crisis that we have to face. Why do we rely so much on space technology? Because it's reliable, it's timely, it's usually quite objective. It managed to go where usually others cannot go, and therefore it is for us an essential instrument. Let me give you just a few examples. Recently, Libya. We were able, through satellite imagery that we got, to get a clear picture of what was going on the ground. And that was very useful for the kind of political contacts, negotiations we could have here and there. And the same thing can be said of many of the other events that took place. Commissioner Georgieva mentioned a few minutes ago Ivory Coast. It was quite useful for us to get all this in due course, in a timely way, swiftly, as we need to react quickly to events, to get a clear picture of what was happening on the ground inside the city of Abidjan during the whole Christmas period and afterwards. Let me give you another example also. The mission of observation we have to do in Georgia. With the two other regions involved, South Abkhazia and South Ossetia, we may have problems in getting a clear observation on what's going on the ground, because the local authorities are refusing for our observation mission to go at the border there. So it's very useful for us also to get satellite images and pictures in order to give and to provide our observation mission with the best possible assessment of the situation as it is unfolding on the ground. Lastly, let me give you another example where we have very recently, I must say, a good success is the whole Kimberley process. Some of you know what it is, others may not know. It's about the whole trafficking of diamond mining in the southern part of Africa. thanks to the images we've been able to get and through the support that we have had from the European Joint Research Centre, we have been able to get a very accurate analysis of what was going on the ground and to be provided with the necessary information, the necessary intelligence that help us during the recent negotiations that we have. And we have been able to put the Kimberley process back on track and to get, in the last few days, a success and getting it back on board as we wanted to, and as many of our partners in the international community had more or less accepted a sort of defeat and were not trying to push it anymore. So just to pinpoint once again and focus once again on how important it is for us to have this technology at our disposal and to move ahead. What do we need from there? I think we need three things, and I will end up with that. First of all, the best technology possible, and to get regular, updated and improved technology as we move along. That's very important, of course. The second asset that we need, of course, is to get the right analysis and to be able to have the right analysis of the product, imagery, images, whatever it is, that we get from this space technology. And I think this is very important because it's what we need in a regular basis, the most accurate and objective assessment that we may need. The last, of course, necessary asset that we must get, of course, is to improve the way we can use these technology for a comprehensive approach, the one I was telling you a few minutes ago, the one that encompasses not only intelligence, military dimension, political dimension, but also everything that we have to do with development assistance, with what Commissioner Georgieva was saying a few minutes ago about humanitarian assistance, the need to be able to look at one issue with all the different dimensions of that issue. So this is where we are at the moment, and I'll stop there because I've been quite too long.
Merci, Monsieur Vimont.
Thank you, Mr. Vimont. I'll come back to you after we hear from Mrs. Arnaud. You are Chief Executive of the European Defence Agency, so you have the floor.
Est-ce que ça? Oui. Merci beaucoup.
I think that crisis management and space in that process has many aspects. Some crises have been mentioned, and they are, for example, the question of security of defense is very important in the civil area, and this has been mentioned by Pierre Vimont. Also in the military sphere, military actions, for example, against piracy by the European Union, and these have received support from satellite communications. And I'd like to thank France Aspect for helping out, because they've shown what the European Union can do for the satellite center. And Mr. Leguet will go into more detail on this. For satellite observation, and also considering the criteria mentioned by the Commissioner, in order to have satellite observation that we can rely on, we need to have speed, as you've mentioned, security. You also need as great a certainty as possible as regards reliability of data with regard to accuracy and availability. So there are two things that come into play here. A synergy between the military and civil aspects. These are technologies that serve military but also civil aspects, and they can only be of use if they benefit from these criteria of speed, accuracy and security, which the military players thought about when they developed the technology. If the satellite center has provided some data, I don't think we're at the end of the line. We still have progress to make. And I'll talk about our role in this a little later, but we need to have certainty and accuracy that the government capacity can supply. And this is backed by the military players. As this applies to satellite observations, secure communications, positioning, and all the technologies from the space sector. If we look at Libya, for what was demonstrated there was what can be achieved. I'm not talking about what the European Union did, but rather NATO. There was a degree of accuracy there in the military operation, which could only be achieved by very sophisticated technology, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. And space, obviously, is all part and parcel of that. It's clear that you cannot act in military terms if you have less accuracy. And the United States said that they would not provide what the European Union should be able to provide in this area. So to do something, for example, even in a humanitarian action, you need accuracy. So not having collateral damage. So civil victims, civilian victims, as little as possible. And that is extremely important. And that is part of the intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance that I was talking about. So there is a very close link between the missions, but also the generation of resources used in space technology. Now, the European level is extremely relevant here, and as Mr. Van Rompuy said earlier, the treaty has provided for shared competence between member states and the European Union on space matters, and the European space policy should promote the implementation of other policies, including the common defence and security policy. The second important point here, I'm not saying it's the EDA that's going to guarantee the future of space, but in the mission of the agency, it says that we have to support member states in providing them with what they need. So research and development, markets for industry and capacity. So space has been recognized by member states in the development plan as something that is priority for development of capacity. So member states, and that's the defense ministers in the EDA, and they defined space as a priority for capacity building. And in order to do this, we can implement actions within our competence as regards research and development and for markets. Now, because of the economic crisis, there's growing awareness that the only way we can work is by pooling our efforts and sharing our capacity. And space is a key issue. On the 30th of November, the defense ministers are going to meet to see where they can implement this pooling and sharing, and space is part of that. And there'll be something in the area of satellite communications, having a type of purchasing unit in order to save and to improve capacity. The hope is that on the basis of the savings on quick win actions, something would be released for investing in the future. As I mentioned, satellite communications at the end of the decade, our member states are going to have satellite communications, are going to have to renew and renovate what they have. And so people have to save where they can in order to be able to reinvest. The last point I'd like to make, I'm sorry for speaking at such length, this is, apart from pooling and sharing, you need to have synergies for government and intergovernmental policies. And space is an example of this. I agree with what Paul Weissenberg said earlier. So together with the Commission and the Commission services, we have a cooperation framework between the European Defence Agency, the Commission and the ESA, and we have signed an administrative agreement with the ESA, and we are experiencing a financial crisis. Space is a key sector, and we have a problem of resources. So it's now or never. These synergies have to be forthcoming, and with resources as well, to see how there can be synergy between European budgets and national budgets that are also under pressure, and particularly defense budgets. The only solution is to find things that we can do together, looking at the European budget and national budgets. Thank you. Thank you.
Madame Georgieva, Monsieur Vimont.
Mrs. Georgieva, Mr. Vimont, Mrs. Arnaud. Before I give the floor to the next speaker, I do have a question. Given the importance underscored by the Commissioner, Mr. Vimont, of having good quality images available, do you think that we need the same appliances in the civil field as we have in the military field of captors? And do you think that pooling and sharing and improving that will allow us to contribute to that? I don't know who would like to start off. Mr. Vimont, possibly?
Je vais répondre en français pour changer un peu. Juste pour...
I'll answer in French this time round. As Claude France said very well earlier, there's an issue of how we fund all of this and of the resources. If we can find the resources in Europe, then that is brilliant. If we don't, which seems to be the case at the moment, then it means you need close cooperation between the member states that have this technology and the rest of the European Union. So it's more about coordination amongst us, and that is also at the heart of the thinking on defence and security in Europe at the moment.
In our work, and in particular in the humanitarian work, we rely primarily on civilian capacity, including when we talk about space technology. And I would say, from my perspective, for Europe to have its independent space capabilities, it is an advantage. It is also a competitiveness issue that I'm sure you have discussed in the previous session, and you will continue to talk about it. This being said, obviously when the needs are growing and resources are not, it is absolutely paramount to make best use of technology and to cooperate so we can bring the benefits to users to the fullest. For the humanitarian community, there is a very critical question of protecting the neutrality, impartiality and independence of humanitarian work. And that places the question of cooperation with the military, and it goes all the way to cooperation when it comes down to data, military satellites providing information. It has to be done in a way that does not put at risk humanitarian operations and the lives of people who are committed to those. Last month, October, was a record high in terms of kidnapping of humanitarian workers in Kenya and Somalia. And that, of course, makes us pause. But this being said, it does not mean that we do not cooperate with military in humanitarian affairs. They are, sorry, I'm dwelling a bit more, but I want to be sure that I give a clear answer to this question. When it comes down to use of military capabilities for humanitarian work, especially in conflict zones, where the military can be perceived as one-sided, a part of the problem, if you wish, then we must be sure that military capabilities are applied as last resort. They are applied either to provide relief. Think of Haiti and the role of the American military capabilities to save lives. They are applied to provide security. I'm thinking of Sudan. I mean, I can go on and on, but Sudan, Somalia, where military capabilities are critical to provide security to civilians, but also to humanitarian workers. They can be applied to provide both relief and security, or they can be a major problem. In other words, they should not be applied at all. And I'm thinking of, say, NATO providing assistance inside Pakistan during the floods last year. So, unfortunately, life is not simple. To conclude on this point, I would say, as long as we are aware of risk and sensitivities, of course we can cooperate so we can make best use for the citizens of the world from all capabilities, including military capabilities where they are in existence.
Merci, Madame la Commissaire.
Thank you very much. Mr. Leguet, you are part of the Agency for the Exploitation and Production of Data from the images from satellite observation. And you are dependent, obviously, on commercial suppliers and so on, and we'd be very interested to hear your views.
Madame.
Thank you, Madam. Well, I'd like to give you the view of the EUSC as an instrument for crisis prevention and management. Perhaps I could say a few words on what the Centre is. It's an agency which falls under the High Representatives of the European Union, and it's near Madrid. The mission is to support the decision-making process of the European Union in the CFSP and the CSDP, Security and Defence Policy, by providing products coming from satellite imagery, mainly satellite imagery. So we are an operational agency providing satellite imagery.
Aux utilisateurs. Alors ce sont...
Who are our users? Well, first of all, the European External Action Service, in particular the CPCC, the Civilian Planning and Conduct Unit, the UMS, also the Joint Situation Centre, and then the various OHQs. So all of the actors involved in crisis management. Member states are also our users, as is the Commission, and also third countries who have agreements to receive the products which we produce, and also international organizations such as the UN and NATO. They're customers or users of ours as well. Our core business then in the center is spatial intelligence, in particular image analysis. We assess, visualize and describe infrastructure or human activity which is geographically referenced, and we then also draw on additional information which is available and accessible. But the core activity is imaging and then analyzing that to draw meaning from the image. And there are two sources we use for that, two main imaging sources. There's the commercial providers of imagery and then the governments. We have agreements in place with member states that have surveillance capabilities. There's Elias, Sarlupo for Germany, and then Italy has one in place as well. So the challenge for our centre is to be able to obtain the images that we want so that we can support real-time support if there is a crisis. And the time element there is very important. It's a key element for our centre and the way we operate. I also mentioned that we analyse images once we've obtained them. We want to make sure that the best use can be made of the images, and therefore we need the necessary tools for these people to carry out their analyses. So that's another concern of ours in the centre, to make sure that our staff have the necessary resources to carry out these analyses so that we can provide products to our users. We cover a broad spectrum. The electromagnetic spectrum, radar, infrared, imageries, not just fixed images but also mobile images. All of that is part of our remit, and we deal with all of these issues. Training of analysts, of course, is important in the centre as well. We need to make sure that the necessary skills are in place and that our analysts can carry out their work to the best of their ability. And the Satellite Centre tries to produce and share information and tries to make that available for the 27 member states. I'll try and give you some examples of where we supported crises and where the centre was called on to provide input. Sometimes we work 24 hours round the clock where needed. We work 24/7. North Africa, Libya in particular, we were very busy with that. We also worked on the possible evacuation of EU citizens from those areas. So you need to locate people. We also gave follow-up to certain specific areas. There's the Atalanta operation, the fight against counterfeiting. We support the fight against counterfeiting. With images, we try and identify possible locations for attacks by pirates along the Somalian coast. There's the operational headquarters of Northwood. We support them. And there's also the task force on efforts deployed at sea. We support them as well. If we want to be relevant, of course we need to make sure that whatever we produce on the basis of the images is produced within a short period of time so that that can actually be used on the ground. Chile, Madeira, Haiti, We were involved there to deal with natural disasters. The centre was involved. We wanted to do damage assessment and analysed images to that end, and we activated GMES for that. We're also involved in counter-proliferation work, but I've just mentioned GMES, and the Satellite Centre is a GMES player. We're involved in various projects there. Security is Mosaic, Safer is also a further project. We also, through GMES, try and provide information on North Africa, and we try and support the External Action Service in their efforts, and also the Commission. In conclusion, then, I'll say that the Satellite Centre has real experience when it comes to providing support in crises, especially the security aspect of that. And we also have real experience when it comes to the management of sensitive and classified data. The other speakers have mentioned capabilities. We need to have capabilities. We need to be on the ball, make sure that we constantly adapt to new challenges, and training is a big part of that. In a very basic and elementary terms, we're an imaging centre, but again, without the image we can't work, but of course we also carry out an analysis of the image. We need access to images at all times so that we can obtain reliable data, and the main point of our work is to provide real-time support to the authorities in Europe, and in particular the High Representative, so that they can become active in the field. That really is what is at the heart of our work and ensures our credibility.
Before I give the floor to Mr. Zvoboda, I'd like to put a question. You talked about dependence. How does this affect the capacity of the centre? Perhaps you could give us more information.
Je lisais l'image.
You mean access to image? Well, I just told you that the raw material we work with is the image. And we have two main sources where we get our images. There's the governmental side and then the commercial side. You have member states that have systems in place for imaging and can give us access to their images. And in commercial terms, our source for images is a different one. We're very pragmatic. We have a budget and we buy images with that budget. And of course, we try and buy those images which have the relevant quality to react to a specific need within a certain deadline and at a certain cost. So we look for whoever can provide images that meet those three criteria. When it comes to the use of images from governments and government systems, well, again, there certain conditions are in place for our use. All of that is written down. Of course, we have to keep to those rules and to those agreements. And we can use those images from member states' systems, but we can't pass them on. We can't render them public. I don't know whether that answers your question, but that is the dependence we have on imaging coming from elsewhere.
Mr. Zvoboda, and I'd like to ask you, perhaps you could draw the initial conclusions of this first part of discussions. What is this impact for the external policy of the Commission, and how does it affect intervention in crisis situations?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Sorry I have to come back to the political issues again, but space policy, as you see, is a very strange animal. It's a combination of different political, technical, dual-use elements, whatever, and it is very complex. But as the Commissioner Georgieva said, life is not simple, and I will come back to that later. It is fortunately not simple, but sometimes unfortunately not simple. To combat crisis, I think we in this room, and you especially, the experts, know how important space policy is for crisis prevention, but I doubt that politicians in general know it already. And therefore, I think it's a common endeavor and a common fight we have to fight to prevent crisis. Unfortunately, the biggest crisis we have now, the economic crisis, cannot be prevented by space policy, but there are many other issues, and I think if the European Union really wants to take seriously their line of prevention of crisis and helping to overcome existing crisis and frozen conflicts, it is very important to go in the direction of space policy. Monsieur Vimont already mentioned the case of Georgia, where we are prevented, in spite of what has been the agreement of Sarkozy and Medvedev at the time, by the local authorities, but also by Russia, to go into the areas of Abkhazia and especially South Ossetia. But we have other means to get to know what is happening there. And it's very important also for the confidence and the situation in Georgia itself and the restraint in Georgia itself to have information. I can tell you another example. When I visited years ago the Golan Heights and saw the situation there and heard the Israeli argumentation that they have to occupy still the area because they have to prevent that the military-free zone in Syria is misused and military is going into that zone in the direction of Golan Heights, it was very obviously that this can be controlled not only by occupation, but by satellite systems, where you can see movements of the military and therefore can have that information. The same is with Nagorno-Karabakh. The Armenians argue, well, we want to keep the forces of Azerbaijan far away from Nagorno-Karabakh, and therefore we have also to occupy some areas of Azerbaijan, and not only of Nagorno-Karabakh. Again, this observation and this control could be done much more efficient without the hardship, without the refugees in Azerbaijan by satellite system and by space policy. So you can add many other arguments and many other examples where you really can show that by satellite system, space policy, space information policy, you can have a much better and less harmful and less humanitarian violent control and crisis prevention or even solution to the crisis. And as was also said, speed is an enormous problem because you can't wait until you see with your glasses if military is moving. By satellite, you have a pre-information. Of course, to add another problem to the solution, it's always hard what you do with your information. I think it was also General Director Vimont who mentioned Libya and the information we got. So again, and take the example of Syria internally. What do we with the information we would have about the Syrian military move forwards or move towards a certain direction? Do we give the information to the resistance movement in order to protect themselves or not? So there are many questions still to be solved. I don't see it. Things are all solved. But with more information, we get more obligation and more, of course, responsibility to use this information in a responsible way. Of course, again, in the protection of human beings and not, of course, for military intervention unless it is sanctioned by the United Nations. And then I come to the question of dual use and again, underlining what the Commissioner said, life is not simple. We in this Parliament are also very sceptical about many dual-use perspectives, but on the other hand, we have to confess it would be a waste of money if we would not use, on the other hand, in specific cases with certain arguments, the dual-use principle, because if we get information on the military side, why we should not use it for humanitarian side. And again, the case of Libya was very clear, where we had the use in both directions. According to some, especially of course some other members of the Security Council, it was an overuse, and an overuse also of the Security Council resolution, which was helped by, again, by space information we got via satellite. Again, what I want to underline is political judgments cannot be substituted by space information we get. What we do with the information we get is again a question of political responsibility we have to go. Only two last remarks. It was the discussion before mentioned we have that kind of global responsibility, and I fully agree we have the global responsibility also as a Europe. But nevertheless, it doesn't mean that we should not go as European Union for our own systems and instruments. And therefore, I was very much supporting the Galileo system. We could have perhaps tried to get a global system, or could have lent ourselves to the American or other system. No, I think it is absolutely important to say we want to have our system, and others invite to cooperate with our systems, of course, that is clear, and we should use the system also to the global, for the global interest. It doesn't mean that we have a European system and only use it for narrow European interest, but we have to use it also for stronger global instruments. But I think it is absolutely important, as was mentioned also by the Commissioner and by Monsieur Vimont, that we go the European way, but always a European way in the sense or in the framework of our global responsibility. And the last point I want to underline, if you want to have your own policy, you have to finance it. And still, I know many hesitations on the financing, and I think it is absolutely important, and I hope that this conference and your work at home in your different national capitals will help that we really can have also enough finance. I know we have many other problems, but if we really want to have our instrument in crisis prevention, we need some money for that. So let's fight together also for the money for the European space policy. Thank you very much.
Merci. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Swoboda. I'm going to give the floor now to Mrs. Vessier. So satellite communications are very important for crisis areas, and which affect poor regions, and I'm sure that you have a lot of information on this.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We have seen this morning that in a globalized world of societies and nations, many of the pressing problems, from terrorism to climate change to demand for energy, are global in nature. And this has been underlined by many speakers before me. And countries must be prepared to address a wide variety of security problems that might arise with almost no warning. Adaptive and flexible reaction capabilities require much more versatile and relevant intelligence and information capabilities. And this is why, in this context, Europe is becoming more sensitive to debates about the military and strategic uses of space, and space applications are increasingly mentioned as a necessary step for enhancing European security, whether it is in the military sense or as a way to increase the safety of populations confronted with natural disasters or man-made catastrophes. Space is now indeed recognized as a fundamental contribution to the common security and defense policy of the European Union. As you said, the European space policy provides that the relevant security actors in Europe need to better consider synergies between civil and military programs. The structured dialogue called for by the 2007 Space Council gathers all major concerned institutional players, and this is a forum where these players can elaborate a clearer vision of what Europe can achieve in space for security, taking into consideration the challenges of joining forces. As a consequence, the European Space Agency is reforming itself to address security issues more boldly. ESA has long been considered a civil agency, but if you read the ESA Convention, it does not define ESA as such. The only element that could clearly lead to this conclusion is the source of its funding, of civil origin. But yet, nothing in the ESA Convention prohibits this agency from conducting military-funded programs or for defense and security users, as long, of course, as those programs are undertaken for peaceful purposes. And as a matter of fact, the spectrum of activities opened by the Convention is extremely wide. So today, in crisis management, several national, European and commercial space assets are used for Earth observation, satellite communications and navigation. However, all these programs are usually undertaken in isolation from one another and usually aim at providing information at the strategic level, but not providing, as many of you have already said, the right capabilities or the right information on the ground for crisis management teams. And furthermore, there is a growing consciousness that the pooling of these space capabilities is both a political and a financial necessity. Finally, an increased responsiveness would be a clear added value, and assets, space assets, need to be better integrated to bring the right information to the right people where they need it in times of crisis. These ideas have been accepted by the 7th Space Council in 2010, which has invited the European Commission, the European Union Council, assisted by the European Defence Agency, together with Member States and ESA, to explore ways to support current and future capability needs for crisis management needs through cost-effective access to robust, secure and reactive space assets and services, taking full advantage of dual-use synergies as appropriate. So with this goal in mind, we at ESA have made several studies and published a number of experts' reports to understand the actual needs of several security user and defense user communities. We have identified needs for improvements to be brought in the field of data collection and processing, data transmission capabilities, and integrated tools mixing Earth observation, telecommunication, and navigation technologies. We have also initiated a number of concrete programs with a very pragmatic, user-driven or service-driven approach, and not with the usual technology push approach. And I just would like to give a few examples. We have launched the European Data Relay System program, which aims at the provision of relay services via geostationary satellites, precisely in view of improving the data transmission capabilities of Earth observation sensors whilst improving their responsiveness. Moreover, this program is developed in partnership with a private service provider. We have also launched an initiative to define the scope of a satellite-based automated identification system that would complement the existing coastal devices in view of providing additional maritime surveillance information to a variety of European communities of users. This initiative is developed in cooperation with EMSA, the European Maritime Safety Agency, and may lead to the development of a hybrid satellite system, possibly made of very inhomogeneous satellite components. The satellite-based infrastructure will then deliver data that eventually will be merged with different information coming from a variety of other sensors. Actually, satellite-based AIS services are currently demonstrated with different user communities, both commercial, like ship owners, and institutional, like customs, Frontex, the Frontex agency, harbor authorities, using existing national, private, and European assets. More generally, we have launched a program named Integrated Application Promotion Program, which allows to assess the feasibility and set up demonstration of services in an approach where from the inception, the users and all the value chain actors are involved and financially contribute. We believe that space-based assets, either existing or expected to be available by 2015, are capable of supporting some new security and emergency response services. These services could reach a pre-operational or even operational status, provided that a suitable programmatic framework is set up and partnership with relevant stakeholders are well established. So, therefore, and I will conclude with that, all relevant stakeholders, whether they are public institutions or private companies, should really join forces to quickly overcome the political hurdles and set up in a very pragmatic manner the frameworks which can allow a quick deployment of these first operational services. Of course, obviously in parallel to this very pragmatic, user-driven and service-driven approach, Europe must keep on developing the new advanced space technologies. But this has been mentioned already a number of times. Thank you.
Merci, Madame Bessière.
Thank you, Mrs. Vessier. I'm sure your message has been heard. Mr. Béranger, you representing the European Satellite Operators Association, what do they expect of the Union, particularly at these times of crisis? Not financing, but perhaps long-term contracts, and particularly in terms of the legislative framework. You have the floor.
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So it's really a great honor for me to share with you my views as chairman of ESOA on the role of space for crisis prevention and management here at the European Parliament. ESOA, just as a reminder, is the association of all European satellite operators together. Together, we fly over 150 satellites. We employ more than 6,000 people, and we have a combined turnover of over 6 billion euros. Space industry overall in Europe employs 30,000 highly qualified people. This capability is, I think, of vital strategic importance to Europe, and this needs indeed to be maintained and advantaged by policymakers. In the field of crisis prevention and management, satellite services already today can support indeed all aspects of the disaster's response chain. It was mentioned from situation assessment and prevention via Earth observation to positioning thanks to navigation services, which are currently based on the US GPS system, but which will be complemented in the coming years by Galileo. Satellite services also provide reliable and, above all, resilient, I think this is a very important functionality, resilient communication links, which are crucial to ensure the coordination of crisis management teams. Now, focusing more particularly on SATCOMs, on satellite communication services, what type of benefits do they bring for crisis prevention and management? I would mention just a few. First, they exist today. They do exist. And already today, they help in crisis prevention and management. It's a proven capability, and ESOA members are leaders in this field. We have participated in prevention and management of numerous disasters around the world. And unfortunately, this year again, we had quite a number of opportunities to participate, be it for earthquakes, tsunamis, Fukushima, or hurricanes. Also, satellite communication services deliver solutions which are plug and play, that work when terrestrial infrastructure is destroyed or down, or simply overloaded, where nothing else works, the satellite still works. Also, those services, they are easily integrated with other satellite services, such as indeed navigation and Earth observation. And above all, the kits can be transported very easily around the world, indeed for immediate use. Satellite communications also are secure. And when it comes to speed, when it comes to real time, they provide a very important feature, which is true mobility. For instance, they are absolutely vital to enable communications between moving teams in operations, in the field, in theater, and HQ. The national governments are very well aware of those benefits, since many ESOA members are contracted already today to provide emergency government services. Modern SATCOMs also are interoperable. This is a feature that Commissioner Georgieva explained to us, how much it was important. They are interoperable. And already today, different agencies, NGOs, military, civil, or governmental, are easily sharing critical information, images, and data in real time thanks to those. This is used indeed for the anti-piracy project Atalanta, for instance. So, what do we need? First, as I mentioned, those services, they are existing today. They are available. And it's pretty nice. They do not impose any new financial burden for public budgets because they are there. Simply, if we want to use them, the first thing is, of course, not to forget about them, which means that they need to be included in all future regulation and legal instruments. The other thing is that, and it was mentioned as well this morning several times, is that those services are dependent on satellite spectrum, radio frequencies. Today, those capabilities, as I mentioned, they are a tremendous asset for our union. But it's important to protect and to grow this asset. And to this end, it is absolutely paramount to give adequate protection to satellite spectrum to ensure continuity of those unique services. Last but not least, I would like to call upon the Commission and also to take advantage of the presence of Mr. Vimont with us and kindly ask the External Action Services to involve us, the operators, in discussions on the equipment and services needs of the future European Crisis Management Center. Indeed, this is when we define the solutions together that we make everybody at the end of the day much more efficient. To conclude, if I could have a dream, I reassure you a modest dream, I would refer to the fact that we always see Hillary Clinton carrying US satellite terminals in her kit bag. So let allow the European Union missions show their lead when equipped with European satellite terminals and be proud out of it. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Ber.
Thank you, Mr. Béranger. Mr. Pinto, do you think that your involvement could trigger a greater participation of the public without any funding being made available for that?
Thank you very much. Let me try not to repeat what my fellow panelists have said and try to complement and bring a private sector point of view that Eric has already started addressing your question. If you look at the space technology in the context of crisis prevention and management, there are a few points that we could mention straight away. First, as Eric has mentioned, we have the technology in Europe. There is mobile technology for satellite phones, for internet connectivity, for providing infrastructure very quickly into disaster-stricken areas. That technology is there to be used. And one message that I'll have through my short talk is that I would like to encourage the institutions to go and use it. There is also, and that's not necessarily obvious to people that are not familiar with the space industry, there is also what we call surge capacity. Of course, all operators try to maximize the use of the assets that they have in space. But the way we plan our satellites and our capacity, when you launch a satellite, you launch it for 15 years. So it's quite common that most operators in Europe and globally, they have the capability to increase and direct additional capacity to disaster-stricken areas, many times at short notice. I'll give you a couple of examples. In Haiti, for example, within 3-4 hours, the capacity for SATCOMs, specifically satellite comms, not necessarily imagery or navigation, which is always there, the capacity for satellite communications was duplicated over that area. And in 24 hours, it was 15 times higher. The industry can do that without necessarily having new big investments. And let me share with you part of the experience from that event and other events like Japan and its tsunami in Sri Lanka and so on. It's almost a sad fact that for the first couple of hours, very little actually happens. In fact, there is radio silence. People are stunned and trying to react. But quickly, there is an exponential, if you wish, demand for resources, spectrum and satellite resources, 4, 5, 6, 24 hours after the event. So we have the technology, the mobile technology. We have the surge capacity, and we have that in Europe. Companies like Inmarsat, SES, Eutelsat, Avanti, and others, they have that capability in various frequency bands, L-band, Ku band, and the new Ka band, where we have satellites like Ka-Sat and the forthcoming Inmarsat 5. That capacity is therefore being used, and look at it from a holistic aspect. It's not only about defense and aid agencies, even though they are vital. The media as well is very important in the response to a disaster. We observed, again using Haiti as an example, that 50%, half of the traffic was actually commercial coming from Haiti, mostly from media organizations. And at first sight, you could think that that would not be a priority, but that's not the case. Because making the world aware of that disaster is vitally important to mobilize the resources of various countries and institutions. So, if you look at the technology, at the surge capacity, at the capabilities that Europe have, and those capabilities being there without the need for additional investment from the public sector. Now, of course, many of my colleagues, and I'm in favor of that, welcome investment in the space industry by the institutions. But you don't necessarily need that. Sometimes you just need to use what you have in there, and that's a vital tool for crisis prevention and management. Another example, and that will be my last example that I would like to raise, is that even now there are joint programs between the European Space Agency and industry, AlphaSat being one of them, the automatic identification systems that Magali also mentioned being another, where industry and the institutions, the European Space Agency, the European Community, are working together to provide satellite capacity that can be used not only for commercial purposes, but also for crisis prevention and management. So if there are two messages, in fact, that I would like to put is that, first, there is no need to necessarily invest, but there is a need to coordinate, harmonize what the private sector can offer with what the institutions need. And second, that the space industry is an enabler in terms of SATCOMs and navigation, Earth observation, not only for Europe, but across the globe, for better crisis response and prevention. And that should not be underestimated as a benefit for the space industry for Europe as a whole. That's the message that I try to bring from the private sector in terms of this panel. So thanks for your attention. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Pinto. We're going to carry on with the next two speakers and then ask the Commissioner to conclude. However, I have to inform you that the interpreters will no longer be available because they are entitled to their lunch break, so we're going to carry on in English.
Mr. Neja, please go ahead.
Yeah, I would like to draw on or put the focus on another aspect in the discussion. We've heard a lot about the capabilities and the opportunities that satellite communication can bring. T-Systems, as part of Deutsche Telekom Group, is obviously not a satellite telecommunications company, but our core business is based on telecommunications with fixed line communication and mobile communications, and of course also the various IT technologies around that you all know. And if you look at the situation around crisis management and crisis prevention, I would also mainly focus on the crisis prevention aspect. As you can imagine, if you run an infrastructure which is mission critical for a lot of businesses, for a lot of public institutions, like large networks like we do at Deutsche Telekom, the prevention of crisis is an essential part of your business model. You have to be able to manage your infrastructure in a way that it's absolutely secure, that you're not affected by any kind of crisis in whatever way, and to prepare yourself for whatever crisis. And if you then look at these capabilities that you have to provide for your own, let's say, business, and if you look then in a situation, what we've seen in Italy recently, what we also have seen in other crisis situations like in the fires in Greece, for me there is one big question around that. A lot of people are carrying devices like this, mobile devices and other devices, but the information we've seen and all this information provided via space, all these pictures are mainly used for crisis management, and I think they are very, very helpful and they are very effective in that. But is there a way of using them also for crisis prevention? Is there a way of bringing this information as fast as possible? And it was raised also earlier that speed is essential. Is it possible to inform people before they are in a life-endangering situation? And the question from my perspective, or the answer to that, is rather difficult, because the information might be available in time. Sometimes you have hours to inform people, but why is there no information flow? And if you then go into the technology available, at the end it's all, let's say, digital information. So you receive on your mobile devices digital information. Pictures are also available in digital formats. So there's no real technical obstacle that prevents information to be transferred as fast as possible to end users or to users or to people. But still, it doesn't happen. Some people say there's an app for everything. I haven't heard of an app for crisis prevention yet. So the question for me around that is why is there no integration between the production and let's say the space production of information and then the flow towards people and the information to people? And the point is, and this was also raised earlier, is that it's simply a statistical problem from my perspective. For everybody in this room, probably, the chances to be involved in a crisis in the next 10 years is very, very low. So why should you pay for any kind of information? You rather buy music from an app store you rather buy from Apple or whatever, but you won't pay 1 or 2 euros per month for a crisis prevention app. So in this respect, I think it could be a valid, let's say, ambition on a political level for various agencies to elaborate on, is there a way of using the information available and bringing these, let's say, valid informations to the European people in a fast way. We've been addressed after the tsunami catastrophe a couple of years ago by some states in Asia. If we could help in having a kind of SMS alert, this was discussed for many, many months afterwards. But let's say after a couple of years, the whole discussion now died. I haven't heard of a system put in place for an SMS alarm system yet. So for me to conclude around that and to end on the view we can add from a telecommunications perspective, I think the technology is there to do a lot more with the information available out of space. The question is, how can we get this available information as fast as possible, as effective as possible to people in a situation that is dangerous for them and that helps to prevent crisis before you have to manage the crisis. So I can only encourage people in charge of that to focus on the solutions for that question. Thank you.
Thank you, Ralph. I think that the Commissioner and Mr. Vimont will get back to your question in answering it just after. Mr. Magliosi, I'll give you 5 minutes.
Yes. As I understand, I am the last in the panel. So as the last in the panel, I will come back to the start of the panel. That is the title of this panel, that is Space is a Fundamental Tool for Management of Crisis Situation. And this is true in all the different phases of an emergency. And around that, I would like to develop some consideration on the role of industry, reporting also some real examples of services and products normally used in crisis situation in the area of geoinformation. And we already heard the Commissioner Georgieva on the importance of this type of products. The use of satellite-based geospatial products such as maps, images, specific thematic analysis for supporting crisis management is possible only if their provision is compliant with the operational requirements in terms of reliability, quality of the information, timelines, and so on. The process to conceive and implement operational services and products requested more than 10 years of industrial investment and user needs understanding. And now we can see that these products are really operational and can support operational users involved in the emergency management. Today, industrial service providers are able to guarantee reliable and timelines access to satellite data with a multi-mission approach. They can ensure operational services based on precise service level agreements and standardized maps and value-added products. Operational service providers can guarantee 24/7 service availability and massive production of information compliant with the international standards whenever it is requested. At the same time, industrial services providers continue to innovate production chains, products, platforms for accessing the information in order to keep the services compliant with user needs and a fast-evolving market scenario that we have. In particular, Earth observation-based products can provide information during the entire life cycle of a crisis management, can provide risk monitoring and risk analysis maps that can be used for crisis prevention, can provide event evolution maps during the evolution of a crisis, damage assessment during the reconstruction phase following the emergency event. Radar images are the best data sources for flood damage assessment, even immediately after the event, thanks to the sensor capability to acquire in all weather conditions. They can be used also to monitor the evolution of the wet areas during the period following the flood. There are some slides, if you could. Thank you very much. Okay. Optical data are suitable for infrastructure and building damage assessment after earthquakes, while radar images are useful for change detection analysis and terrain displacement analysis. Oil spill detection and tracking is currently performed with the radar images, and as an example, during the disaster occurred in Louisiana, on the BP platform, more than 300 images of the Cosmos Skymed constellation have been used by the US government and by the international authorities to monitor the evolution of the oil spill. Now, I want just to present two real examples for showing the use of satellite during the crisis management, as also the Commissioner did before. This case is the case of the Australia flooding on the 4th of March 2010. In the last decade, the floods are one of the most frequent crisis situations and have a huge effects, and we see also in Italy in these days. Last year, in March, a big flood occurred in the eastern part of Australia, in the Queensland. EGEOS started acquiring daily Cosmos Skymed images over hotspot areas indicated by the Australian Department of Environmental Resource Management, generating visible water extent maps. Cosmos Skymed was immediately tasked by the emergency team just after the event, and after 30 hours from the event, the first map reporting the area affected by the flood were delivered via web to the Australian authorities. Then followed by a new update report delivered on a daily basis. Here, using radar data, it was possible to extract. Here we can see that the cloud, the area was fully covered by cloud for several days, and the radar data were the only possible source of data for this type of analysis. Using radar data, it was possible to extract, using automatic algorithms, information related to the flooded areas and overlap this information with optical data like a Google Earth map, so to have a clear map of the situation on the terrain. The second example is related to the accident of the Rena cargo vessels in New Zealand, occurred just 1 month ago. Again, Cosmos Skymed was tasked, and the first oil spill report was issued after 30 hours from the activation and updated on a daily basis. On the next images, we can see the different images. Thanks to Cosmos Skymed constellation and its frequent revisit on the area of interest, it was possible to monitor the evolution of the spill and to track spill during the days following the events. In conclusion, the availability of satellite constellation with high revisit possibility, high resolution, like Cosmos Skymed, that can operate in all weather conditions, together with the combined use of optical data and the application of a number of extraction algorithms operating in an automatic or semi-automatic way, represent today a basic tool for the crisis management. I succeeded with just 1 minute more. Thank you.
So I will let the Commissioner the difficult task to conclude in a short time also, and then we will take 1 or 2 questions because we have to finalize at least at 1:30.
Thank you very much. Mr. Swoboda is not here. He said something that we now live under the cloud of the economic crisis, and space is not relevant to it. but I recently heard a story that kind of begs to disagree, and the story is that there are two ways to resolve Europe's economic difficulties. One is realistic, the other one fantastic. The realistic is for extraterrestrials to come from space, take over our institutions and fix our problems, and the fantastic is that we are going to fix them ourselves. And I think this story actually applies to the discussion we have today, because the most important conclusion I drew is that our biggest problem is not making full use of the capabilities we have. In other words, it is a human-made problem, and therefore the most important conclusion is that we need to the regulatory policy and financial investment we must make a priority is an investment in removing the bottlenecks on the way of making use of available technology. This goes also in dual use, codify best practice, make sure that we understand risks and we manage these risks. It goes into protecting and growing the band for emergency communications, understanding the problem and addressing it, and so forth. And I think that is where I would let it be, that we must make the commitment to invest in making full use of capabilities and identifying where the advancements are critical and direct investments in this scarce, financially scarce environment, direct investments there. And I would finish with a promise to Mr. Berenger that I will make your dream come true. Look at my back next time when we meet.
Thank you. I think we have time to take one or two questions. Is there any question? Yes, please. Okay.
Just a comment, if I may, Professor Linson from the IMNRC Newport Network. Whatever the thematic, the issues have reached such a level of complexity that politicians, experts, academics and the audience are getting completely out of their depth. Why? This is because we are faced with integrated interdisciplinary challenges, something that the educational system has not prepared us for. The third millennium's top priority, world society, well-being, quality of life, is such a challenge. Now, integrating space in world society, well-being, quality of life is an excellent initiative. But we must change to the education of tomorrow, integrated interdisciplinarity. Otherwise, we shall be completely lost. Thank you.
Thank you.
Short or long answer? Short. I agree.
Okay. I want first of all to thank all the participants of this interesting debate. I want to apologize also for the timing because we do not have enough time to take a question and an answer session, but nevertheless I really want to thank all the participants. So there is no lunch previous inside the European Parliament building because there is a Commission debate, so that was not feasible. So if you want to have something for lunch, you need to go outside the building, Place du Luxembourg. Relating to our debate, we will